My name is Carol. I am 52 years old. And the morning my son's fiancée sent 200 wedding invitations to every person in our town, neighbors, co-workers, distant cousins she had never met, and left mine out on purpose, she did not know that the venue she had booked for the reception was registered under my name. Not my son's name. Mine. She had spent 8 months planning a wedding inside a building I owned. She had signed a contract with my LLC. She had chosen the tablecloths, the centerpieces, and the dinner menu inside 4 walls that, legally, I controlled. And she had done all of it without ever once being kind to me. That is the part she never thought through. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. If you have ever poured everything you had into raising a child, alone, quietly, without applause, and then watched someone walk into that child's life and treat you like a problem to be managed, you will understand every moment of what I am about to tell you. Drop the word "Venu" in the comments. I read every single one. And make sure you are subscribed, because what happens in the final 20 minutes of this story is something I could never have planned if I tried. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to the wedding. Not to the invitation I never received. Let me take you back to a Tuesday evening in October, 3 years before any of this started, when a woman named Renata first walked through my front door on my son's arm, smiled at me with perfect teeth, and looked around my living room the way people look at something they plan to redecorate. I noticed it immediately. I said nothing. That is a pattern you will hear again. My son's name is Nathan. He is 29 years old, and he is, without question, the best thing I have ever done. I raised him alone from the time he was 4. His father left for reasons I spent too many years trying to understand and eventually stopped needing to. What I know is this: from the morning Nathan's father drove away with a single bag and did not look back, I became everything. Provider, protector. The person who sat outside the bathroom door when Nathan had a fever at 2 a.m. The person who drove him to baseball tryouts at 6 a.m. On a Saturday when I had worked a double shift the night before. The person who cried in the car on the way home from his college orientation so he would not see me cry inside. I worked as a facilities manager for a commercial property group for 19 years. It is not glamorous work. It is organized, detail-oriented, unglamorous work. But it taught me things that mattered. It taught me how buildings are leased, how contracts are structured, how an LLC functions as a legal entity, how the name on a document is the name that holds the power. I learned those things slowly, 1 year at a time, one training and one property walkthrough at a time. I did not learn them in a classroom. I learned them because I had a son who needed me to be competent, and so I became competent. When Nathan was 23, he mentioned offhandedly that he hoped to get married someday at the Whitmore Event Center. It was a converted textile building downtown, exposed brick, tall windows, original hardwood floors. The kind of place that photographs beautifully. The kind of place that books out 2 years in advance. I knew the building. I had toured it years earlier on behalf of a corporate client. I knew the owner was looking for an investor partnership to fund a renovation of the East Wing. I made some calls. I ran the numbers. And 6 months after Nathan's casual comment, my LLC held a partial ownership stake and a renewable right of use agreement for the Whitmore Event Center. I did not tell Nathan. It was not a calculated move. It was a mother thinking ahead the way mothers do. I wanted something beautiful to be available for him when the time came. 3 years later, Renata chose the Whitmore for the reception. She booked it herself. She negotiated directly with the venue coordinator. She signed the contract and paid the deposit. She never once asked me anything about anything. By then, I already knew what Renata thought of me. She had made it clear in the small ways that never quite rise to the level of an argument. The way she redirected Nathan's attention when he and I were mid-conversation. The way she described me to her friends as Nathan's mom, with a slight pause before the words, as if she needed a moment to locate me in some hierarchy. The way she took over every plan that had previously been ours and presented it as something new she had invented. None of it was cruel enough to name. All of it was enough to feel. The invitation was the first thing that was cruel enough to name. 200 envelopes. Every neighbor on my street received one. The woman across the hall who had watched Nathan for a single afternoon in 2003 received one. I did not. I found out from my neighbor Linda, who knocked on my door on a Thursday evening holding a cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering, her face doing that particular thing faces do when someone is delivering news. They cannot believe they are the one delivering. "Carol," she said carefully, "did you get yours yet?" I looked at the envelope in her hand. I already knew the answer. Linda stood in my doorway for a long moment, the envelope still in her hand, her eyes moving between me and the gold lettering like she was waiting for me to tell her there had been some kind of mistake. A clerical error, a postal delay, something reasonable. I didn't give her that, because I already knew there was no mistake. "I'm sure it's on its way," I said. I smiled. I thanked her for checking. I closed the door. Then I stood in my front hallway for a full minute without moving. The thing about a wound like that is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in stages. First there is disbelief, the mental scrambling to construct an innocent explanation. Then there is the slow, sickening recognition that no innocent explanation exists. Then there is something quieter and harder to name, a kind of settling. The feeling of a suspicion you had carried for 3 years finally sitting down and making itself at home. I had known something was wrong with Renata from the beginning. Not dramatically wrong, not in ways that made for easy confrontation, in the small, persistent ways that are designed to be deniable. Let me tell you about Nathan, so you understand what I was protecting. He was a serious child, not somber, serious. There is a difference. He laughed easily and often, but he thought before he spoke, even at age 6. He had opinions about fairness that seemed too considered for a boy his size. When other kids argued on the playground, Nathan was the one trying to understand both sides. His 3rd-grade teacher called me in for a conference and said, "Mrs. Reyes, I want you to know your son has a remarkable sense of justice." I drove home from that meeting and cried in the car, not from sadness, from recognition. He got that from watching me navigate the world alone. When you raise a child by yourself, they see everything. They see you tired and they see you push through it. They see you worried about money and they see you figure it out. They see you hold your chin up in rooms where you feel out of place. And they learn, without being taught, that dignity is something you carry with you. Nathan learned all of that. He also learned, because I tried very hard to teach him this, that the people you choose to love should be chosen carefully. That kindness is not the same as performance. That someone who is charming in public and cold in private is telling you the truth about themselves in private. I wish he had applied that lesson to Renata. When he brought her home the first time, I prepared dinner. Roasted chicken, rice, the kind of meal I had made 1,000 times that said, "You are welcome here, I want to know you." Renata arrived 40 minutes late, apologized without looking at me, and spent the dinner talking about a campaign she was managing at her public relations firm. She was polished. She was quick. She laughed at the right moments. She did not ask me a single question about myself. That in itself is not a crime. Some people are nervous. Some people talk too much when they are uncomfortable. I gave her the benefit of every doubt I had. Over the following year, the doubts ran out. There was the evening Nathan and I had planned to have dinner. Just the two of us, our regular Thursday routine. And Renata arrived unannounced with reservations at a restaurant across town. Nathan looked at me apologetically. I waved him off. I ate alone. Renata never acknowledged it. There was the Christmas morning Nathan called me, excited, to tell me he had bought me a gift. A bracelet he had seen me admire months earlier. When he arrived to give it to me, the box had already been opened. He seemed confused. Renata explained, lightly, that she had wanted to make sure it was the right size. The bracelet fit me perfectly. It had clearly never been resized. There was the afternoon I stopped by Nathan's apartment to drop off some paperwork he needed, something he had asked me to bring, and Renata answered the door and told me he was busy. Nathan called me 20 minutes later, surprised I hadn't come inside. He said he hadn't heard the door. Each incident, alone, was nothing. Together, they were a map. I watched Renata manage Nathan the way a skilled person manages a room. She was never openly unkind to him. She was attentive, enthusiastic, good at reading what he needed in a moment and providing exactly that. But she was also, I came to understand, strategic in a way that never quite settled in my stomach. She knew what Nathan valued. She reflected it back to him at the right angles. And what Nathan valued, above nearly everything, was loyalty, steadiness, the feeling of being chosen without condition. He had grown up watching me give him that. He recognized it. He was drawn to it. And Renata was very, very good at appearing to be that. What she was actually doing was something different. She was building a version of Nathan's life in which she was the center and everything else, his friendships, his habits, eventually his family, slowly reorganized itself around her. I was the only piece that wouldn't move. I think that is why she decided at some point to simply remove me from the picture entirely. The invitation, or the absence of one, was not the first step in that plan. It was closer to the last. The first step had come quietly, 2 years earlier, on the evening she got engaged. Nathan proposed on a Saturday in April. He called me before he called anyone else. That was Nathan. He wanted me to hear it from him, not from a social media post or a secondhand message through a relative. He was out of breath happy in the way you only hear once or twice in a person's life. And I sat on my kitchen floor. I don't know why I sat on the floor. And I cried the good kind of tears and told him I was proud of him and that I couldn't wait to meet the woman who made him sound like that. I meant every word. 2 hours later, Renata posted the engagement on social media. 47 photos in a carousel, the proposal, the ring, the restaurant, the moment, the aftermath. She tagged Nathan's college friends, her coworkers, her sisters, a lifestyle blogger she apparently knew. She did not tag me. She did not mention me. In 47 photographs documenting the beginning of my son's engagement, his mother did not exist. I told myself it didn't matter. Social media is not real life. The post was for her audience, not mine. Nathan had called me first. That was what counted. I kept telling myself that for 2 years. I should have stopped much sooner. The engagement dinner was held the following weekend at Renata's parents' home. Her family was warm in the way that certain families are warm, loudly, collectively, in a way that filled every corner of the room and left little space for anyone outside the circle. Her mother embraced Nathan, like he was already hers. Her father gave a toast about family and legacy and the future. Her sisters cried. It was a beautiful evening, and I sat at the far end of the table with a glass of sparkling water and a smile I had practiced in the car on the way over. No one asked me to speak. Nathan caught my eye across the table at one point and mouthed, "You okay?" I nodded. I was. Or I was doing what I had done since he was 4 years old, which was decide to be okay because the alternative was not available. In the weeks that followed, the wedding planning began. And this is where I want to be precise, because what happened over the next 18 months was not one large dramatic act of cruelty. It was a series of small exclusions, each one plausible on its own, each one clearly intentional in sequence. I was not invited to the venue tours. Nathan mentioned they were looking at several locations. I waited to be included. I was not. I was not invited to the dress shopping. I found out it had happened when Renata posted a photo with her 3 sisters and her mother, all holding champagne glasses, with the caption, "Said yes to the dress with my favorite people." I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I put my phone down and went for a walk. I was not included in any discussion about the guest list. I learned from my sister, who had been invited to the wedding and had called to ask about our seating arrangements, that Renata was handling all of that herself. When I gently raised it with Nathan, Just once, just a brief question about whether there was anything I could help with. He said, Renata really wants to manage the planning. It's her thing. You know how she is. He said it kindly. He was not trying to hurt me. He had simply been so carefully managed that he no longer recognized the managing. That sentence, you know how she is, told me everything. He had accepted her behavior toward me as a fixed feature of the landscape. He was not defending it. He was not endorsing it. He had simply stopped questioning it, the way you stop questioning weather. That is what sustained exclusion does to a witness. It normalizes itself. There was one afternoon, about 14 months into the engagement, when I drove past the Whitmore Event Center and saw Renata's car in the parking lot. She was doing a walkthrough with the venue coordinator. I knew this because the coordinator, a woman named Susan, who had been my contact on the ownership side for 2 years, had sent me a routine message that afternoon letting me know a final pre-booking walkthrough was scheduled. She did not know that the bride-to-be was my son's fiancée. She was simply doing her job. I sat in my car across the street for a moment. I thought about going in, introducing myself, watching the expression on Renata's face when she understood what she was standing inside. I did not because I was afraid, because the time wasn't right, and because I had learned over 52 years of being underestimated by people who should have known better, that patience is not weakness. Patience is the decision to let the truth arrive on its own terms, in its own time, where it will do the most work. I drove home. I made dinner. I called Nathan to ask how his week was going. He said fine. He said Renata was deep in wedding planning mode, but that everything was coming together beautifully. He said he wished I could be more involved and that he would mention it to Renata. I told him not to worry about it. He did not know that I had been involved from the beginning. That every meeting Renata had at the Whitmore had taken place in a building connected to my name. That every centerpiece she had deliberated over, every lighting option she had debated, every menu she had sampled, all of it had happened inside square footage that my LLC controlled. She had been planning her victory inside my building. She just didn't know it yet. And then the invitation arrived. Or rather, it didn't. The week the invitations went out, I counted 6 of my neighbors who mentioned receiving theirs. 6. In a single week. On my street alone. Linda across the hall. The Garcias next door, who had moved in only 8 months earlier and had met Nathan exactly twice. The retired couple at the end of the block, Tom and Patricia, who had watched Nathan play in their yard as a child and still called him by his childhood nickname. Patricia stopped me outside the mailboxes on a Wednesday morning, invitation in hand, bright-eyed, excited, and said, "Carol, can you believe it? We're going to the wedding. Nathan's getting married." She squeezed my arm. She assumed, naturally, that I knew everything, that I was involved in everything. I smiled and told her it was wonderful news. I went inside and stood in my kitchen for a long time. There's a specific kind of pain that comes not from what someone has done to you, but from what they have revealed about themselves by doing it. The invitation list told me exactly how calculated Renata's thinking was. This was not an oversight. People do not forget to invite the groom's mother. They do not accidentally exclude the woman who raised the man they claim to love. Every single decision about that guest list had been deliberate. She had held my name and put it down and moved on. And she had done it knowing Nathan would not notice until it was too late. I want to pause here for a moment. What I just described, sitting inside your own home while 200 people in your community are invited to your son's wedding, while you are not, if you have ever been in a room or in a life where everyone around you was included and you were quietly, deliberately left out, drop the word "a silent" in the comments. I read every one of them, and stay with me, because what happens in the next 30 minutes is what 3 years of patience finally built toward. I did not call Nathan immediately. I needed to be certain before I said anything, because I knew that if I raised this without proof, Renata would find a way to make my concern the problem. She was skilled at that. She could transform any legitimate grievance into evidence of what she had already told Nathan I was, a mother who couldn't let go. A woman who needed too much. Someone who made things about herself. So I waited 2 more days. I checked with my sister, who had received an invitation. I checked with Nathan's college roommate's mother, a woman I had known for years who had also received one. I even, quietly, checked with a coworker of Nathan's, who barely knew our family and had been included on the guest list. Then I called Nathan. He answered on the second ring. Cheerful, slightly distracted. I could hear Renata's voice in the background. Nathan, I said, keeping my voice level. I want to ask you something directly and I need you to give me an honest answer. A pause. Okay. Did you know that I didn't receive a wedding invitation? Silence. Not the silence of someone who is surprised. The silence of someone who is surprised. The silence of someone who has just been asked a question they hoped would not come. Mom, yes or no? It's complicated. My hand tightened on the phone. Nathan, did you know? He exhaled slowly. Renata handled the entire guest list. I told her to include you. She said she would talk to you about it directly. She has not spoken to me about anything. Another silence. Then, quietly, I'm sorry. I'll fix it. Naying. Quietly, I'm sorry. I'll fix it. But he said it the way people say things they believe and cannot act on. I had heard that tone before. It was the tone of a man who had been very carefully placed between two people and told, implicitly, that choosing one meant losing the other. Renata had been building that impossible position for 2 years. The call I had been dreading came that evening. Renata called from what sounded like another room, her voice smooth and unhurried, as though she were discussing a minor scheduling adjustment. She said that the invitation list had been finalized based on the venue's capacity. She said they had to make difficult choices. She said she hoped I understood. I asked her what the venue's maximum capacity was. She hesitated. Around 250. And how many people were invited? A shorter pause. Just under 200. I let the math sit between us. Carol, she said, her voice shifting slightly, less smooth now, something harder underneath it. I think you and I both know that this transition is difficult for mothers. Nathan is starting a new chapter. That means certain dynamics have to change. I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm trying to build a marriage. By not inviting his mother. By establishing healthy boundaries. She said it like a definition. Like something she had rehearsed. I did not respond right away. I let the silence run. Then I said, I understand, Renata. Thank you for explaining. She seemed surprised by that. She had been ready for an argument. She had not been ready for calm. Of course, she said carefully. I'm glad we could talk. We hung up. I sat in my kitchen chair and looked at the wall and thought about the Whitmore Event Center. I thought about the contract sitting in my LLC's files. I thought about the owner authorization form that no booked event could proceed without. The form that bore my signature line. The form that was, as of that moment, completely blank. I did not sleep well that night. Not because I was angry. Anger would have been easier. What I felt was more complicated than anger. It was a specific exhaustion that comes from being proven right about something you spent years hoping you were wrong about. I had watched Renata for 3 years. I had given her every benefit I had. I had swallowed every small cruelty and told myself I was being fair, being generous, being the bigger person. And now she had called me to explain, in careful language, that I would not be attending my son's wedding. I got up at 4 a.m. and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad. I wrote down everything I knew. The venue contract, the LLC structure, the owner authorization clause, the capacity numbers Renata had given me, and what those numbers meant for her explanation that I had been excluded due to space limitations. The timeline of every exclusion, going back to the engagement dinner. Every incident I had documented, not obsessively, not with bitterness, but with the quiet precision of a woman who had worked in property management for 19 years and understood that details matter and that memory is not the same as evidence. I filled 4 pages. Then I called my lawyer. Her name is Patricia Chen. I had worked with her for 11 years through my LLC business, lease agreements, liability questions, the occasional contract dispute. She was direct, efficient, and allergic to drama for its own sake. She was exactly the right person to call. I explained the situation calmly. The venue, the ownership structure, the owner authorization form, the wedding date 6 weeks out, the fact that no authorization had been requested, processed, or signed. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. So the event cannot proceed without your written approval, she said. Correct, and no one has requested that approval, she said. Correct, and no one has requested that approval. No one. Another pause. Carol, what is it you want to happen here? It was the right question, and I had been sitting with it since 4 in the morning. I don't want to cancel the wedding, I said. That was never the point. I want my son to get married. I want to be there when he does. What I don't want is to be quietly erased from the picture by a woman who calculated that I wouldn't fight back. So you want to be on the guest list. I want to be there as his mother, in whatever seat a mother is supposed to occupy. Patricia was quiet for another moment. Then she said, The leverage is real. The authorization requirement is in the contract. But how you use it matters. You can be aggressive and get what you want, and damage your relationship with Nathan in the process. Or you can be surgical. Tell me what surgical. Tell me what surgical looks like. She told me. I spent the following week doing what I have always done when I am preparing for something that matters. I moved slowly. I checked every detail. I read the venue contract 3 times. I reviewed the LLC's owner authorization clause with Patricia until I could have recited it from memory. I confirmed with Susan, the venue coordinator, that no authorization form had been submitted and that, per the agreement, one would be required no later than 30 days before the event date. That deadline was 11 days away. Renata did not know about the deadline. She had signed a contract containing it, but people sign contracts without reading them every day. It is one of the most consistent features of human behavior. We agree to terms we have not examined because we assume the terms will never matter. The terms were about to matter. I want to be clear about something. During that week, I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel clever. What I felt, mostly, was sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that a woman who claimed to love my son had decided that loving him meant cutting me out of his life. Sad that Nathan, who was good and decent and perceptive in so many ways, had been so thoroughly managed that he could not see what was happening clearly enough to stop it. I thought about calling him, telling him everything, laying the documents on the table, and letting him deal with it himself. I decided against it. Not because I didn't trust him, because I knew that if I brought this to Nathan before I had all my pieces in place, Renata would spin it immediately. She would make it about me overreacting, about me using legal documents to manipulate my son's wedding. She would take the truth and dress it in my worst qualities and hand it back to Nathan, and he would not know what to do with it. She was very good at that. So I waited. I kept my phone calls with Nathan normal and warm. I asked about his week. I asked about the new case he was working on at the firm. I did not mention the wedding. I did not mention Renata. I did not mention the authorization form sitting in my LLC's files with nothing on the signature line. I just waited. On a Tuesday morning, 10 days before the deadline, Susan called me. Carol, she said, pleasantly professional as always, I'm reaching out because we have an event booked for the 19th, and we still haven't received the owner authorization. I've checked our records and it looks like the booking party may not have been made aware of the requirement. Should I reach out to them directly, or would you prefer to handle it? I looked out my kitchen window at the quiet street below. I'll handle it, I said. I did not call Renata. I thought about it. I rehearsed versions of the conversation in my head over several days, the neutral opening, the precise explanation of the authorization requirement, the calm delivery of what it meant for the wedding timeline, and knew exactly what I wanted to say, and exactly how I wanted to say it. But every version of that phone call ended the same way. Renata would hang up, call Nathan, and reframe the entire situation before I had the chance to be in the same room as both of them. She would have hours, maybe days, to construct the narrative. By the time Nathan heard my side, it would already be buried under hers. I had watched her work for 3 years. I knew her method. She operated best at a distance. She was most dangerous when she had time and privacy to shape a story before anyone could question it. What she could not manage as effectively was a room. A real conversation, with witnesses, where the documents were on the table and the words were said out loud and there was no editing possible after the fact. I needed a room. The opportunity arrived without my arranging it. Nathan called me on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks before the wedding, and asked if I would come to a small family dinner that Sunday. Renata's parents were hosting. Just the immediate families, he said. A chance for everyone to connect before the big day. He sounded hopeful in the way he sometimes sounded when he was trying to smooth something over without naming it directly. "Will Renata be there?" I asked. "Of course, it's her parents' house." "Then I'll be there," I said. I want to be precise about my state of mind that Sunday. I was not going to that dinner to make a scene. I was not going to that dinner to humiliate Renata or to perform some kind of victory. I was going because my son had asked me, and because I had a legitimate, documented, time-sensitive matter to raise that affected the legality of the event they were all planning to celebrate in 13 days. That was the entirety of my intention. I wore a simple navy dress. I brought a bottle of wine. I arrived exactly on time. Renata's parents' home was large and carefully decorated. The kind of house that has been styled rather than lived in, where everything matches and nothing is out of place. Her mother, Diane, met me at the door with a smile that was warm enough in shape, but did not quite reach her eyes. Her father, Gerald, shook my hand with the firm efficiency of a man conducting a business meeting. Renata was in the kitchen when I arrived. She came out carrying a serving dish, saw me, and her expression went through several things in rapid succession before settling on a composed, practiced pleasantness. She said hello. She gestured toward the living room. She did not hug me. Nathan crossed the room immediately and embraced me. He looked relieved I had come. That relief told me something. It told me he had not been certain I would. We sat down to dinner. Gerald poured wine. Diane brought out a series of dishes that were clearly intended to impress. The conversation moved through the expected channels, the wedding timeline, the honeymoon plans, a story from Nathan's colleague about a bachelor party detail I hadn't known about. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. The evening had the pleasant, slightly pressurized quality of a gathering where everyone is performing normalcy, with great concentration. I ate my dinner and I listened and I waited. It was Diane who gave me the opening, though she did not know she was doing it. She set down her fork at a natural pause in the conversation and smiled across the table with the specific expression of someone about to say something generous about someone they do not particularly like. It was a face I had seen before in professional settings. The smile of managed tolerance. "Carol," she said, "we are just so glad you could make it tonight. Renata tells me you've had some concerns about the wedding. I hope tonight puts your mind at ease. Everything is so beautifully organized. The venue is just stunning. Renata's taste is really extraordinary." She looked at her daughter with visible pride. Renata smiled. She picked up her wine glass. She looked at me with the calm confidence of someone who had already won. The table was quiet for a moment. Nathan looked at his plate. Gerald refilled his own glass. I set down my fork carefully. "The venue is beautiful," I said. "I know it very well, actually." Renata's smile stayed in place. "Have you attended events there before?" "Not as a guest," I said. A small silence. Just a beat. The kind of pause that does not yet announce itself as significant. My LLC has held a partial ownership stake in the Whitmore Event Center for 3 years, I said. Susan Caldwell is my primary contact there. She called me last week to let me know that the owner authorization form for the 19th hasn't been submitted yet. I kept my voice even and pleasant the way you describe weather. Every event at the Whitmore requires written approval from the ownership group. The submission deadline was yesterday. Nothing has come through. The table went very still. Gerald's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Diane's expression did something complicated. Nathan looked up slowly, his eyes moving to my face with an expression I had never quite seen on him before. Not anger, not confusion. Something closer to the look of a man who has just heard a sound he cannot immediately identify and is holding very still while he locates it. Renata set her wine glass down. She looked at me across the table. For the first time in 3 years, the composure was not quite complete. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "What did you just say?" I reached down beside my chair. I had brought a bag. A simple canvas tote, the kind I carry to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. Nothing dramatic about it. Nothing that announced itself. I had placed it beside my chair when I sat down, and no one had paid it any attention, because it looked like the kind of bag a woman brings to a family dinner. A hostess gift, a cardigan, in case the room ran cold. I set the bag on my lap and removed a manila folder. The folder was not thick. It did not need to be. The documents inside were precise and limited, 3 pages, each one doing exactly the work it needed to do. I had learned that lesson in property management. You do not bring everything to a table. You bring what is necessary and nothing more, because excess creates noise, and noise gives the other side room to maneuver. I set the folder on the table beside my dinner plate. The room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something has shifted, and no one has yet agreed to acknowledge the shift. Diane's hands were in her lap. Gerald had set his wine glass down. Nathan had not moved. He was watching me with that same still expression, his jaw slightly set, his eyes careful. Renata had not moved either. She was looking at the folder the way people look at something they cannot yet categorize. Not afraid, not dismissive, just suspended. Waiting. I opened the folder. "This is the LLC registration document," I said, placing the first page in the center of the table. "Filed with the state in 2019. You can see the entity name, the registration date, and the listed principals. My name is here." I pointed to it without leaning forward. "This is the right of use agreement between my LLC and the Whitmore Event Center Ownership Group." I placed the second page beside the first. "Executed in the same year. It grants my LLC scheduling rights and operational approval authority for events held at the venue." I paused. No one spoke. Outside, somewhere down the street, a car passed. The sound of it came and went. I placed the third page on the table. "This is the owner authorization clause." Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the standard booking contract. Every client who books the Whitmore receives this contract. It states that all events require written authorization from the LLC ownership group no fewer than 30 days before the event date. I smoothed the page once with my hand, a small, unhurried gesture. The wedding is in 13 days. No authorization has been submitted. Gerald found his voice first. He stopped, started again. "This can't be right." "You're welcome to call Susan Caldwell at the venue," I said. "She is expecting the authorization form. She's also aware that it has not yet arrived." Renata's face had gone through several changes during the time I was speaking. The composed pleasantness had left first, quietly, like a light switched off in another room. What replaced it was something I had not seen on her before. Not anger. Anger would come later. What I saw in those first moments was the specific, unguarded expression of someone recalculating. Rapidly. Under pressure. Trying to locate the move they had missed. Her jaw tightened. Slightly. Then more. "You own part of the venue," she said. Her voice was controlled but thinner than usual. like something stretched. My LLC does. Yes, and you've known this the entire time. It was not quite a question. I've known it for 3 years. The color in her face shifted, not dramatically, not all at once. It moved the way light moves when a cloud crosses the sun. The warmth still there in form, but something essential withdrawn from it. She looked for just a moment like someone who has realized they have been sitting in a room and not known who owned the walls. Diane made a sound that was not a word. Nathan said nothing. He was looking at the documents on the table, with the expression of a man reading something he needs to read slowly, because the words are rearranging a room he thought he knew. I want to stop here for just a moment. What you just heard. A woman sitting at a table, setting 3 pieces of paper down quietly, saying only what is factual and nothing more. That is 3 years of patience landing exactly where it was always going to land. If this story has reminded you that the truth does not need to be loud to be powerful, drop a single word in the comments. The word is steady, because that is what this took. And subscribe if you haven't already, because the next 12 minutes are where everything that was built in silence finally speaks at full volume. I closed the manila folder. I looked at Renata directly, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with the even, unhurried attention of someone who has said what they came to say and is waiting for the response to catch up. I am not here to cancel the wedding, I said. I never was. I want Nathan to get married. I want to be there when he does. What I need before I sign the authorization form is to understand why his mother was not on the guest list while 200 other people were. Silence. Full, complete silence. Gerald looked at Renata. Diane looked at Renata. Nathan looked at Renata. Nathan looked at Renata. She was the only person at that table who could answer the question, and everyone in the room had just understood that simultaneously. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands, folded on the table in front of her, were very still in the way that hands are still when a person is working very hard to keep them that way. Nathan and I made those decisions together, she said finally. Nathan's head turned slowly toward her. No, he said quietly. We didn't. Nathan said it the way he said everything that mattered. Quietly. Without theater. With the particular stillness of a man who has just located something true and is not going to let go of it. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Renata, and there was something in his expression I recognized from when he was a child, the specific look he wore when he had been told something was one way and discovered it was another. Not rage, not dramatics, a kind of interior settling, the expression of someone who is done being uncertain. Nathan, Renata began. The guest list, he said. You told me my mother was on it. You told me you had spoken with her. I did speak with her. You told her she wasn't coming a beat. I told her, Renata said carefully, that we needed to establish some boundaries for the health of our marriage. The word boundaries landed in the room and did not improve anything. Diane made the sound again, the one that was not a word. Her hands came up from her lap and folded on the table in front of her. She looked at her daughter with an expression that was hard to read but was clearly not pride. Gerald still had not spoken. He was looking at the manila folder on the table with the expression of a man who has just understood the precise dimensions of a mistake. Not his own. The one across the table from him. He was old enough and experienced enough to recognize the difference between a negotiation and a situation that is already concluded. He said nothing. That silence was its own commentary. Renata. Nathan's voice was steady, quiet. It did not rise. She is my mother. She raised me alone. There is no boundary in the world that covers leaving her off the guest list for our wedding. Renata turned toward him fully now, and the composure she had been maintaining with such effort shifted into something else. Something raw. Whether it was genuine emotion or the performance of it, I could not say with certainty. What I can say is that it looked, in that moment, very much like the expression of someone who has realized the plan is not working and has moved to the next available option. I was trying to protect us, she said. Her voice dropped, softened. You don't see it, Nathan. You never see it. She is always there. In every decision, in every plan, in everything. I wanted one day that was just ours. She wasn't in every decision, Nathan said. You made sure of that. Renata blinked. Nathan turned to me then. And here's what I want you to understand about that moment. My son looked at me across that dinner table, across the documents, across the cooling food, across 3 years of dinners I had not been invited to, and fittings I had not been included in, and a guest list with 200 names that did not include mine, and what was on his face was not pity. It was not guilt. It was the uncomplicated, clear-eyed recognition of a man who has just seen something he should have seen sooner, and is not going to pretend otherwise. Mom, he said. I'm sorry. 2 words. I had not known how much I needed them until they arrived. I pressed my lips together, nodded once. I was not going to cry at that table. I had made that decision in the car on the way over, and I was going to keep it. Thank you, I said. Renata stood up. It was not a dramatic movement. She did not knock her chair back or raise her voice. She stood up the way people stand when they need to put distance between themselves and a conversation that is no longer going their way. She picked up her wineglass, set it down again without drinking, and walked to the far end of the kitchen. She stood with her back partly to the room, one hand on the counter. Diane rose and went to her quietly. Gerald remained at the table. He looked at Nathan. He looked at me. He looked at the folder. He was a man who had built things and mossed things and understood at a fundamental level that certain conversations end the negotiation and begin something else. He reached across the table and picked up the LLC document. He read it. He set it down carefully. Carol, he said, and his voice had lost the boardroom efficiency from earlier in the evening. He sounded for the first time like a father. I want to ask you something plainly. What do you need from us tonight? I looked at him steadily. A seat at my son's wedding, I said. Front row. Mother of the groom. That is all I have ever wanted. A long silence followed. From the kitchen, I heard Renata's voice, low and tight, saying something to her mother. I heard Diane respond even lower. I heard Diane respond even lower. I could not make out the words. I did not need to. The conversation in the kitchen was its own weather system, and it would resolve itself in its own time. Nathan reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His hand was large now. It had not always been. I remembered when it fit inside my palm with room to spare, when he was 4 years old and asking me when his father was coming home, and I had held it and told him I didn't know but that I was right here. Right here. I turned my hand over and held his. I'll sign the form tomorrow, I said. He squeezed my hand once. Hard. Neither of us said anything else. We didn't need to. I signed the authorization form the next morning. I drove to the Whitmore Event Center at 9 o'clock, asked for Susan at the front desk, and signed 3 copies in her office while she made us both coffee. She did not know what had happened at dinner the night before. She did not know what the form represented beyond its legal function. She thanked me for getting it in before the deadline, stapled her copies, and walked me to the door. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes. The building looked the same as it always had. Brick facade. Tall windows catching the morning light. A small brass plaque beside the entrance that listed the building's original name from when it was a textile factory, back before anyone thought to make it beautiful. I had always liked that plaque. I liked that the building knew what it had been before it became what it was. I drove home and made breakfast. That is the part people do not expect when they hear stories like this one. They expect the aftermath to be loud. They expect confrontations and ultimatums, tearful phone calls, and dramatic reversals. What the aftermath actually looked like was quiet. Ordinary. A woman making eggs on a Tuesday morning with the particular calm of someone who has set something down that she had been carrying for a long time. The wedding was 11 days later. I wore the navy dress. I arrived at the church and was shown to my seat in the front row, left side, with a small card on the pew that read, "Mother of the Groom." Someone had placed it there. I did not know who. I suspected Nathan. I did not ask. Renata's family was seated across the aisle. Diane caught my eye when she came in. She gave me a single nod. It was not warm. It was not hostile. It was the nod of a woman who has recalibrated and decided that what happened at dinner had happened, and that the current priority is the ceremony in front of her. I respected that. I nodded back. Renata walked down the aisle on her father's arm, looking exactly as she had always looked in public. Radiant, composed, perfect. She did not look at me. I did not need her to. When Nathan appeared at the altar and turned to watch her walk toward him, his face did the thing that faces do when people are overwhelmed by something real. He pressed his lips together hard. His eyes went bright. He was not performing. He was simply a man who loved the woman walking toward him despite everything, and was standing still inside that feeling. I thought about the boy who asked me when his father was coming home. I thought about gold stars and Mother's Day cards and scraped knees and law school acceptance letters, and every Tuesday morning I had driven 40 minutes to his apartment just to bring him groceries because I knew he hadn't had time to shop. I thought, I did this. This man at this altar is something I built. And then I stopped thinking and just watched my son get married. The reception was held at the Whitmore Event Center. The room looked exactly as Renata had planned it. The centerpieces, the lighting, the hardwood floors gleaming under 100 small, warm bulbs. It was genuinely beautiful. I will not pretend otherwise. Whatever else was true about Renata, she had taste, and she had used it well. I was seated at a round table near the front with Nathan's college friends and their partners. They were warm and funny and asked me questions about Nathan as a child that made me laugh more than I expected to. I told the story about the baseball tryouts and the double shift. I told the story about the law school letter. They listened the way young people listen when they are hearing someone they admire from a new angle, with that particular attentiveness that is itself a kind of gift. Gerald came to my table during the cocktail hour. He pulled out the chair beside me without asking and sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. He looked out at the room, at the dancing, the tables, the lights, his daughter in her gown laughing at something a bridesmaid had said. "You could have stalked it," he said, not accusatory. Factual. "I know. Why didn't you?" I looked at my son on the dance floor. He was laughing at something Renata had said. He looked happy. Genuinely, unguardedly happy, the way people look when they are not performing anything. "Because he loves her," I said, "and he deserved to be there for it." Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's not easy." "No," I said. "She's not easy." "No," I said. "She isn't. Neither were you, I imagine." I looked at him. He was looking at the dance floor with the expression of a father who knows his child precisely and has made his peace with the knowing. "No," I said. "I wasn't." He nodded once. He stood up. He extended his hand and I shook it. Then he walked back to his table, and I watched my son dance with his wife under the lights of a building that bore my name in a legal document no one would ever think to look at again. That was enough. More than enough. 3 months later, I received a card in the mail. No return address. Renata's handwriting, which I recognized from the wedding seating chart I had once seen on Nathan's kitchen counter. Inside, 2 sentences. "I underestimated you. I won't do it again." I read it twice. I set it on the kitchen counter. Then I put it in the drawer where I keep things I want to remember. Not because I needed the apology, because it was the first true thing she had ever given me. By January, things had settled into a shape I had not expected but recognized as good. Not perfect. Not restored to something it had never been. Just good. The quiet, durable kind of good that comes after a long difficulty when the difficulty is finally genuinely behind you. Nathan called every Sunday. That had always been his habit. Sunday evenings, usually after dinner, when he had a few unhurried minutes and wanted to talk without agenda. Those calls had not stopped during the engagement, but they had changed in quality. There had been a carefulness to them in the months before the wedding, a slight holding back, as though he was navigating a conversation in a room with furniture he wasn't sure he was allowed to move. That carefulness was gone. He called me from their apartment now the way he had always called me. Freely, easily, with the specific openness of a person speaking to someone they do not have to translate themselves for. He told me about his cases. He asked about my LLC business. He told me things about his marriage. Small, honest things. The way adult children talk to parents they trust with the real version of their lives. I did not ask about Renata directly. I did not need to. She appeared in his stories naturally, the way a person appears when they are genuinely present in someone's life. He mentioned that she had joined a book club, that she was thinking about a career move, that she had learned recently to make his grandmother's rice dish, and it called him into the kitchen with the particular excited energy of someone who has solved a puzzle. I listened to these things and was glad for them, not because I had softened toward her completely. Not because the 3 years of careful exclusion had been erased by 2 sentences on a card, but because my son was happy, and because I had done what I came to do, which was to be present in his life, in the way a mother is supposed to be present, without apology, without diminishment, without being quietly managed out of the picture. I had done that. I was still doing it. That was enough. In February, I had lunch with Gerald. That surprised me more than perhaps anything else in this story. He called me on a Wednesday, introduced himself unnecessarily, as though I might have forgotten, and asked if I would meet him at a restaurant downtown the following week. I said yes, more out of curiosity than anything. He was already seated when I arrived. He had ordered coffee. He stood when I approached the table, which I had not expected, and we shook hands again the way we had at the reception. We talked for 2 hours, not about the wedding, not about Renata, not about the dinner, not about the manila folder or the authorization form or any of it. We talked about work, about property law, which he knew something about from his business years, about Nathan's career trajectory and what the next 5 years in his field might look like, about a restoration project the Whitmore ownership group was considering for the building's north annex, which Gerald found genuinely interesting. At the end of the lunch, when the check had been settled and we were both putting on our coats, he said something I have thought about several times since. "You know," he said, straightening his collar, "I spent 30 years in business thinking that the person with the most information wins. Turns out it isn't about information. It's about knowing when to use it." He nodded at me once, put on his hat, walked out. I stood in the restaurant doorway for a moment, watching him go. Then I went home to my kitchen, made tea, and sat at the table where I had sat at 4 in the morning with a legal pad and 4 pages of notes, and I thought about everything that had happened from that morning to this one. I had not set out to win anything. That is the part I want you to take with you. I had set out from the very beginning to be present, to stay in my son's life with my name on it, with my seat at the table, with my place in the story. Every decision I made, holding the LLC quietly, waiting for the right moment, signing the form the morning after the dinner instead of weaponizing it, had been made in service of that single goal. Not victory, presence. There is a difference. Victory ends. Presence continues. I learned one thing from the Whitmore Event Center, from that building I had invested in for a reason I could barely articulate at the time, that I am not sure I would have learned any other way. The most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to erase you is to have already made yourself permanent, not loudly, not with warnings or ultimatums or dramatic confrontations, simply by putting your name on things that matter, doing the quiet work, and trusting that the truth about who you are will outlast anyone's attempt to rewrite it. That is my story. presence over performance. If this story reminded you that you do not have to be loud to be powerful, that patience is not the same as surrender, and that sometimes the most important document in the room is the one no one knew to look for, leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought. Tell me your story if you have one. I will read every word. Subscribe to Calm Drama Stories if you haven't already. There are more stories coming. Stories about women who held on quietly, who built their protection long before they needed it, who delivered their truth calmly, with documents, in rooms full of people who underestimated them. Those women deserve to be heard. So do you. Thank you for being here.